Greetings, my name is James Anyike, author of African American Holidays, and I'm thankful to have the opportunity to share some reflections and thoughts about Juneteenth. Um, Juneteenth is the oldest African American holiday. Some may not know that there are other holidays or other times that we refer to as holidays, such as Martin Luther King's birthday, Black History Month, African Liberation Day, of course, Kwanzaa. Some of you may even know about Umoja Karamu, but Juneteenth is that day that is the oldest because it was back in 1963 that Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation. Of course, in 1965, there was the signing of the 13th Amendment. But I'm going to come back to that. What I want you to know, there are a couple of things I'm going to try to do in sharing in these few minutes. I want to share some information, but I also want to dispel some myths. So, as I said a moment ago, Juneteenth is the oldest African American holidays. It did come with different names. It wasn't always called Juneteenth, and even today, some places have different phrasings and terms that they use to refer to Juneteenth. Back in those days, in the 1860s, some may have referred to it as the Freedom Day, Emancipation Day, Emancipation Celebration. We know that some even refer to it as June. And then there, of course, are those who refer to that time as Juneteenth. And so Juneteenth is an important holiday. It was an important holiday for our ancestors because many of them, all their lives, anticipated a time when they would actually experience freedom. And so for them, in their lifetime, to actually have emancipation, to have freedom, was more exciting than anything I can probably explain. I probably don't have the words to express the excitement that spread across the Americas, especially in the South, as Africans were both informed and given the opportunity to actually share in this liberation. So I already pointed out to you that Juneteenth is the oldest African American holiday. I've also pointed out to you that it has different names. What you might not know is that the dates for Juneteenth vary just as much as the names do. We know about June 19th, and that date has gained a lot of weight because Texas, of course, led the charge in really making the celebration of our legal emancipation a really important part of their culture and their heritage. In fact, Texas was the first state to make it a state holiday, the celebrating of legal emancipation for African people. Texas was the first state to do that, but it wasn't necessarily the first state, nor was it the first time that folk were given their legal emancipation in America. Some of you may already know that, of course, it was on January 1st, 1863, that Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, that Emancipation Proclamation did not free all who were enslaved all across America. It only gave freedom to those Africans who were held in what were called rebellious states, Mississippi and Texas and some other states down there that were strongholds of the Confederate movement. And so Lincoln, as a war strategy, gave the Emancipation Proclamation. He certainly desired not to do it. If he could have found another way to bring the Union or to enforce the Union of the states, he would have done it. But he felt that was an important measure in order to weaken the Confederate forces that had begun to become so strong in those parts of America. So he earlier, about a month or so earlier, let it be known that he was going to give this Emancipation Proclamation if these Confederate states did not come back to the Union. They did not come back. So January 1st, 1863, that was when Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation. It not only said that those Africans who were held in these rebel states, not only did it say that they were free, but it also extended an invitation for them to actually fight, or I should say join, the Union Army to give their services in whatever ways they can. And of course, ultimately, they did fight. So I said a moment ago that Juneteenth was not only celebrated on that day, as you know, many of you know, the word Juneteenth generally comes from acknowledgement of the celebrating of legal emancipation in Galveston, Texas, June 19th, 1865. June 19th, 1865. You might ask what happened on June 9th, 1865. It was then that General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston and proclaimed that Africans there were free by way of at this point, the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was signed in April of 1865, and so it was in June that it was enforced. But do know this, those Africans who were held in Texas were actually legally free in 1863 due to the Emancipation Proclamation. There have been rumors, this is part of the dispelling of the myth, there have been those who have said that the reason why it was more than 2 years for Africans in Texas to gain their freedom, even though they were supposed to be free, it was because I know this is going to sound strange for people who haven't heard this, but it was rumored that there was some slow brother on a donkey, and it took him 2 years to finally get to Texas, and specifically to Galveston, Texas, in order to give word of the Emancipation Proclamation and the freedom that came to Africans with it. That's absolutely not true. What actually happened was that even though the Emancipation Proclamation was given in 1863, it was not enforced. That was the key. It was not enforced in those rebel states. And you can imagine it wouldn't be enforced. It wasn't that the Confederate forces were going to say, well, the Union president has given a proclamation, we got to honor it. No, they rebelled against the Union and rebelled against the United States, and therefore they certainly were not going to honor a proclamation from President Lincoln. And so it took time for Union forces to get to those different destinations and locations in order to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. And then certainly after the war ended in 1865, April, it took now still more time for Union forces to get to those different locations they hadn't gotten to or hadn't already liberated to, again, enforce the emancipation or enforce the 13th Amendment. So what happened in Galveston, Texas, was that there were those police forces and government forces in Texas that would not honor either the Emancipation Proclamation or the 13th Amendment, and they needed to have somebody come down there with military force, which is what General Granger brought, military force in order to enforce. So it wasn't that these folk didn't know. Believe me, African people throughout slavery had a grapevine that was unlike any other major communication resource we have today. They knew that they were legally emancipated or free, but it had to be enforced. Similarly, here we are in 2021, and yet our liberation must be enforced. We celebrate Juneteenth. Some celebrated on June 19th, as in Texas. Some celebrated it on January 1st. There were some who celebrated in August or in October. It depends on the state where that enforcement was able to come. And even though we have emancipation, we have the 13th Amendment, we have what we call freedom, but do we have legal emancipation? When we consider the fact that so many of us are still in prison, and do know this, that the 13th Amendment ended slavery except for those who were convicted of a felony. So if you have been convicted of a felony, you are legally a slave. We still need emancipation. We need to be free, not only in ways that will allow us to live the political freedoms that are due to us. We certainly need to be freed from the justice system, but we also need to be freed from alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. We need to be freed from miseducation. We need to be freed from bad religion. We need to be freed from miseducation. We need to be freed from this economic system that even holds us in such debt. So we are slaves because of the debt that we hold. So my encouragement is that, yes, let's celebrate Juneteenth as our ancestors did. Let's celebrate it with energy, but let's also realize we have yet more freedom to receive. And I encourage you to use this Juneteenth celebration this year and all throughout the year as an opportunity to truly fight and work for our liberation. Thanks so much for sharing. If you want more information, get my book, James Anyike, African American Holidays. Peace and blessings.